Commissioners Duffley, Hughes, McKissick, Brawley, and Tucker. In compliance with the State Government Ethics Act, I remind members of the Commission of our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and inquire at this time as to whether any member of the Commission has a known conflict with respect to the matters coming before us this morning. As the record will reflect that no conflicts have been identified, so we will proceed. Good morning, Ms. Darden.
Good morning. Lindsay Darden, engineer with the Public Staff, Water, Sewer, and Telephone Division. The public staff would like to pull the items number 1 and 2 from the staff conference agenda today. The bond has not been posted as contemplated in the proposed order.
Okay. All right. Well, items 1 and 2 will be removed from the agenda, so we will proceed with the supplemental item.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Charles Junis. I'm the Director of the Public Staff, Water, Sewer, Transportation, and Telephone Division. Supplemental item number 1 in docket number W1049 sub 16 and 27. On December 20th, 2024, the public staff filed a petition for appointment of an emergency operator for all of A&D Water Service, Inc.'s water and wastewater systems in Ashe, Buncombe, Gaston, Henderson, and Transylvania counties in North Carolina, and consolidating the prior EO appointment for Buffalo Meadows with this appointment. A&D has consented in writing to the appointment of an emergency operator. In addition, the public staff requested that the remaining bonds plus accrued interest be declared forfeited. Based on feedback from Commission staff, the public staff is agreeable with the non-substantive edits to the proposed order. You know the saying this time of year, he's making a list and checking it twice. Well, I did not check twice. And so I have a couple of naughty corrections to make this morning to Appendix A. So Appendix A, page 2, I'd like to correct the Rolling Oaks Estates purchase water for resale rate from $4.76 to $4.79. And then on page 4 of Appendix A, I would like to correct the commercial monthly flat rate service on real estate office, sales office, from 6306 to 2253. And then the guardhouse / security entrance from 3157 to 1128. And those are the corrections, and thereby the public staff recommends that the commission issue the proposed order with the commission staff's non-substantive modifications and the corrections described this morning.
Move approval of staff recommendation with the non-substantive corrections and the corrections that were made from the stand today. And also subject to review by commission staff.
And I'll second that motion.
Okay. Mr. Junis, a few questions for you, and then I'll turn it over to my fellow commissioners to see who has questions for you. I'm interested in Redbird's participation here. My understanding is the public staff has been in touch with Redbird regarding its willingness to participate as an emergency operator here, and what did you learn?
Yes, so that is Exhibit 2 to our petition. We provided an email that described Redbird's ability and willingness to be emergency operator. Unfortunately, they were not prepared to take over such a role until at least probably the end of January. This, given the emergency status and the potential abandonment with the new year, we couldn't wait on that. And so we transitioned to working with Carolina Water, and they were willing to step up.
Okay. The commission issued an order in May of 2024, May 22nd, 2024, transferring the CPCN for these A&D systems from A&D to the Redbird utility here in North Carolina. What do you know about, in that the Redbird has not yet closed on the transaction pursuant to which it would acquire those systems and the CPCN would become effective. What do you know, if anything, about Redbird's status on that transaction?
So as recently as Friday, the 20th, it is the position of Redbird that they do not know when or if they will close on the A&D transaction.
Okay, that's all I need to hear. And I recognize that we are asking you to speak on behalf of Redbird, but Redbird is not here. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Was Mr. Deaver, what can you tell me about whether Mr. Deaver's decision to abandon the systems was predicated on the fact that he's under contract to sell these systems and that this commission has awarded a CPCN, assuming that transaction is consummated?
I would describe my conversation with Mr. Deaver that he was basically at a loss of options to proceed. If Redbird wasn't willing to close, then he really didn't have any alternative to transfer the system. And so he felt forced, given his financial condition, to abandon the systems.
Okay. Can you, in my view here, we've got a commission took action in May to transfer the CPCN, recognizing that the CPCN doesn't become effective until the transaction is consummated. But it's been, months since that order was issued. And, we've got a situation where the owner of the system is walking away and left you all with little time to try to work up a resolution. And thankfully, we have a utility here in North Carolina that's willing to step in and operate these systems. But what do we learned here from this scenario, if anything, about how to mitigate against this kind of risk happening going forward? As we know, it's happened in other contexts. with
Yeah,
other
so I
systems.
think the public staff's sort of initial response to this is that we would intend to include in transfer orders or CPCN orders that where they haven't closed yet, a requirement that they report on the status of closing. That increment of time, we haven't really landed that. But I think it is appropriate that, because we had normally operated that the purchaser intends to buy it and close relatively in short order. And that had been the practice before this commission for a long time, at least in my experience. And then all of a sudden now we've seen here on multiple, because Redbird has multiple cases that have not closed despite a commission order. So that's kind of the approach we're going to take. You will likely see additional filings from us to try to press this issue of are you or aren't you, and then to provide status updates going forward.
Okay. Mr. Denton, I see you in the audience. If you would come up, I don't think you have counsel here today. Okay, well, I just want to ask you one question. So well, first of all, let me say this. Thank you for your willingness to step in here and serve these customers. This is obviously one where you're helping avoid what could be a really bad situation for these customers in these communities, who my guess is some of them have been impacted by the storm in some way, shape, or form, given where they're located. But what is it? You're obviously, the company, Carolina Water, has been willing to step in here in spite of the fact that the systems are under contract to be sold to another utility. Does that give you all any hesitation, or does that cause you concern, or can you help me understand sort of how you all assessed the fact that these systems are under contract to another entity in your decision to step in here?
Well, thank you and good morning. I don't see
Just
this.
introduce yourself for the
I'm
purpose of
sorry,
the record.
I'm Don Denton, President of Carolina Water Service. I don't see this as any different than the request for Buffalo Meadows. Obviously, that was post-storm, and it's the exact same scenario as these. When we received the call from Chuck, Mr. Junis, and were asked if we would be willing to participate, we floated it up within the organization, had conversations internally, and I think it's, our belief that this is the right thing to do for the customers of the state, and we're here to support however we can.
Okay. All right, so the fact that the systems were under contract to be sold didn't give y'all heartburn or otherwise?
Not in this case.
Okay. All right, let me see if there, Mr. Denton, go ahead and stay there just in case anybody else has questions. But just remember, Mr. Denton doesn't have the benefit of his counsel. So let's see. We've got, I know Hughes has questions and then McKissick. And then Tucker.
Yeah, I had actually the exact concerns that of the line of questions that we've just had, but I'm going to be a lot more direct. What is the future, as far as you know, of Redbird in North Carolina? This is a utility that has requested accelerated action by this board, and on their side has not seemed to have particularly accelerated action. This is a utility that, from an out-of-state utility, that is trying to piece together a larger sustainable utility by putting together small, discrete systems. At least one commissioner, I'll only speak for myself, viewed the sustainability and future of Redbird as owning enough systems to spread costs. This seems to be a step away from them owning multiple systems in North Carolina, putting the jeopardy the systems that they have closed on. So I know this isn't not a question, it's just extreme frustration. Could you tell me what the status of the systems that Redbird has closed and the approximate number of customers that they have? And then I would like you to add to the report of Redbird is what is their plan for having a sustainable utility out of state that owns small, discrete systems? And I think I'm justified in this frustration because we have seen nothing but evidence that small, discrete systems are having an enormous amount of trouble making it. And did we just add another one? That we now have a new small system that owns a new utility owner that owns only several small systems. So the question is, what more do you know than you've already said? And if it's nothing, that's fine. And then the request is to consider a broader, more comprehensive ask when you go back to Redbird for reporting requirements.
First, Commissioner Hughes, I echo your sentiment. I mean, the public staff's frustrated with where we're at. We are discouraged by having to appoint an emergency or seek the appointment of an emergency operator for a system that we thought we had a solution, that we had settled on terms to facilitate a transfer. What I can tell you is they do have certain systems that they own: Bear Den Acres, Ocean Terrace, Tessie, Bay Tree Waterfronts. They have purchased, now not the Bay Tree from last week, a different Bay Tree, just to clarify. I don't have the customer counts off the top of my head. We did last week have our annual meeting with Redbird to discuss their systems, which stemmed from our settlements from some of the transfer proceedings. They have made some what I would consider mostly maintenance and repair, monitoring improvements to the systems that they own in North Carolina. The big sort of solution capital investment is still sort of in the planning phase from our understanding. So we're kind of monitoring. With regard to the pending transfers, so the ones where they have a commission order and have not closed, it's my understanding generally the concern is title work, that they have clear ownership and control of the assets if they do close. That circumstance is sort of growing tired, I would say. Because we've heard that now for months. So we really do want to see action, and really one way or the other. because to the chair's question earlier, being what I would call stuck as a seller creates real problems. We've talked about this before. It disincentivizes investment, improvements to the system, because as the seller, you have terms that you're stuck with. And so that's just going to ultimately impact what you take home in a closing. So that's, I guess, generally what I know. I'm sure I know more than that, but I think that's an appropriate amount to sort of update this commission at this point.
Well, thank you for that. And I'll just reiterate my request, if possible, when you do ask for reporting, not on a system by system basis, because I don't think we can keep going pretending like these systems are not connected. If a owner owns multiple systems or has a plan to be sustainable by owning a certain number of systems, and they're not making progress on that number of systems, I would like to understand what their plan B is for
Yes,
being
sir.
sustainable.
Yes, sir.
Just one follow-up, and then Commissioner Kissick, on the title work, I recognize you're reciting their concern, so I don't know exactly what their concern is because I haven't heard it from Redbird. But with respect to the issue of, chain of title, or, whether, what, if assuming a utility wants to be able to close on assets and understand what those assets are, where they're located, that they've got the appropriate real property rights, et cetera. I just don't understand why that doesn't occur prior to issuance of CPCN. It seems to me to be a decision that's, I can't really understand why a utility would want to go. Well, let me just say this. Going forward, the commission is going to scrutinize whether the utility has done that work to ascertain, the chain of title to the assets, and that they know what all the assets are, and that they can get them, through closing. Because that to me is that's just a hard one for me to contemplate.
So
Great.
Chair Mitchell, just to comment on that point, the explanation we were provided was they had one example that they provided where after they had done their initial title work and had gotten approval and then went to actually close, they found out that the seller had taken out a loan and pledged utility assets. So they have sort of this one case where things went awry. And so they are very diligent about essentially checking title work again, very close to closing to check
Okay.
for red flags. But still, I don't think that necessarily explains away all the delays that have occurred on some of these systems.
Well, thank you for that additional clarification. That helps me feel a little bit less frustrated. Okay, Commissioner McKissick.
My concerns were concerns which I think Commissioner Hughes and Commissioner Mitchell, Chair Mitchell has addressed, but as it relates to these issues, I'm having a hard time understanding why they did not come up earlier. I guess you just articulated one situation where there might have been changed circumstances, but and I understand that once preliminary title work is done, it's updated immediately before the closing to make sure any changed circumstances are rectified or addressed. But I would think that, in terms of these delays, that, there would have been other ways to have determined whether in fact there were challenges or issues related to closing. I mean, is that the only example they gave? And because that wouldn't be across the board in terms of their inability to close these transactions in a timely way. I mean, I would think that there'd be greater context or greater specificity relating to the challenges that they face, because that's just one particular thing, and I can only see that coming up as an isolated circumstance.
Yes, sir. So specific to A&D, and this is also captured in that email that was provided as Exhibit 2, it's my understanding from that Redbird is concerned about rate recovery of any future expenditures to resolve issues at these systems. It's my understanding that they are dissatisfied with the terms of the settlement that occurred in this case. And so my position is we are where we are. And those are the terms you agreed to. And so then we will move forward as necessary. If it is reasonable and prudent investment, then it is recoverable, as determined by this commission. So you could have that concern about every investment. Mr. Denton
Sure.
could have that concern. There is not sort of a pre-approval process for recovery of capital improvements. So that's just one other piece of this puzzle, but still, again, does not explain the months and months of delay after a process that also took months to work through to ultimately get commission approval. So I hear your concerns. I echo them and certainly take note of you and Mr. Commissioner Hughes' recommendations regarding the reporting requirement.
Sure. And Mr. Kunis, I want to thank you for exercising due diligence and following up on these details and trying to be as proactive as possible. It's just that I look at this Redbird model and I question its viability as it relates to these systems that they've gone under contract to purchase here in North Carolina. And particularly in light of the fact that so many of these applications were deficient from the outset and took extraordinarily long periods of time to cure, yet they were seeking to have us expedite the process and even went to pursue legislation that would establish a deadline within which we needed to act. And now we're finding they can't even close. It's disturbing, but I'll leave that alone. And I do want to thank Carolina Water and Mr. Denton for coming forth and taking on these problem systems at a challenging time, not knowing whether you might ultimately become the permanent operator or the Redbird's going to displace you at some point. And while you're willing to accept that kind of position, I know it has to be challenging for Carolina Water. Now, from what I was reading, it looks as if the rates that are going to be charged are going to be Carolina Water's uniform rates, except where there's purchased water. Is that what's going to take place? And I know that hasn't all been quite worked out yet.
Yes, sir. So it'll be generally the Carolina Water uniform rate for the multi-year risk year 2.
Right.
With the exception of the purchase systems where we're using the existing rate. However, those would still be subject to potential future pass-through filings. We did not have time to assess what are the current rates that are being charged by the provider, nor did we have access to bills to confirm that information. So we will work with Carolina Water on assessing that here in the short term, immediately after this, to determine whether a pass-through needs to happen for any of these systems. Because for the emergency operator, it's very important that their costs are covered to the best we can, subject to true up, obviously, in the end. And that's also why we make the recommendation here to as soon as possible disperse the bond funds to help offset their investment that we're pretty confident it will be necessary on most of these systems. Just an update. So with our concerns about closing, we initiated contact with Redbird. And one thing that they discussed was seeing these systems, because it had been over a year, closer to 2 years since they had actually seen the systems that they had agreed to purchase. And so on November 5th, my engineer, Evan Hauser, actually did an inspection of all of these systems with Central States staff or Redbird sort of parent company staff. There are deficiencies here. There is capital investment that is going to be necessary on these systems.
And knowing that capital investment is perhaps imminent in some instances, and Carolina Water is going to be incurring that cost. And, you know, and they need to be compensated appropriately. In the event Redbird were to decide to close, from what I was reading, the earliest they perceived closing was January 31st of 25, but I don't put much faith in that date. How would that ultimately be addressed? Since we have an emergency operator in there who's at this point in time is operating the systems indefinitely, but Redbird comes in, they do close. How do you address the costs and expenses that Carolina Water has at that point in time incurred thoughtfully and reasonably to provide adequate service?
Yes, sir. So when an emergency operator is relieved, they do a final accounting that we review, and that is the true up process. What was their investment? What were the terms of compensation, such as a return on rate base or an operating ratio, and then any offsetting funds. So in this case, we're recommending that the bond be considered a contribution in aid of construction that would offset any capital investment. If there's not that capital investment, I think typically those bond funds are used as an offset to any operating deficit that occurs. So we would do that true up to handle Carolina Water's investment.
Thank you. Once again, I thank both of you for your work on this. And, you know, I was cautiously optimistic when Redbird came into North Carolina that they could take on some of these troubled systems and could manage them effectively, and these systems could be brought up to par. I'm not quite sure they really have the capacity to perform based upon the track record they've established at this time. So for one, I'm going to be looking at their acquisitions exceedingly cautiously as things move forward. Thank you.
Yes, sir. I would just say, you know, they have a capable contract operator in Clearwater Solutions. You know, we can't close the door. They own systems. They have certificates in North Carolina. We need them to follow through on their duty and responsibility to provide adequate service. And if that requires capital investment, they need to make that capital investment. And then for these systems where they do have commission approval, our expectation is still that they would close. If they do not intend to close, then we would ask that they seek to withdraw those applications and have those orders rescinded, and give these sellers the flexibility to move forward because they have been stuck. And that leads to additional degradation of the systems, potentially additional compliance issues, and ultimately less than satisfactory service to customers. And we will not stand by and continue to watch that.
Well, thank you. And I just question their thoroughness of their due diligence from the outset, whether they really have done the level of research that they state that they have when they come in and I'll leave it at that.
All right, Commissioner Tucker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just trying to be quick here on recoverable expenditures, Charles. It says here, the Carolina Water as EO will be made whole by being reimbursed for all capital investment for replacements and upgrades. So Mr. Denton feels good about that statement and knowing that whatever he has to spend to keep these going or to get them up and running from that standpoint. Is that right, Mr. Denton?
That's correct.
Okay. And let me say thank you, sir, always for what you do. This is not your first rodeo, and we appreciate that so much that you take care of these customers. The other thing I want to ask you, you talked about audits and financials. Do the public staff receive financials on these independent operators to know whether or not A&D was potentially or going to hit the wall like they have now to stop or to get an earlier insight into where this situation was going? Do you get those?
So they're supposed to file annual reports. Unfortunately, I believe A&D has been delinquent for more than 1 year. I think it's actually a couple of years. So we have not had that indication. However, we have had communications with Mr. Deaver. This was one that we were aware was trending in the wrong direction. but we did not know how sort of grave the circumstances were.
So it would be public staff's position to have stronger enforcement in requiring the ability to receive annual audits. So you have some insight into where these systems are before we are here before Christmas Eve trying to serve these customers and doing our job.
Yeah, I mean, we value those annual reports. It is one piece of the
I
puzzle.
understand.
It's important that they also complete those annual reports accurately. It's been our experience that sometimes those annual reports have some issues, and don't quite paint the picture that really exists when we go on into the field or talk
Yes,
to
sir.
the owner.
I understand. May I ask you that, to the best of your knowledge, are all the A&D systems that we're talking about here operational?
It's my understanding they're operational now. They do have compliance issues. I believe 5 of the systems are subject to EPA action. And like I said, we did send staff to go see these systems in early November. Some of those findings were concerning, and we're hopeful that Mr. Denton and Carolina Water Service will be able to jump on those immediately.
Okay. And then finally, I'm always don't understand the varied bonds that are required by public staff and we approve. Did I read here where Mr. Deaver had roughly 110,000 in bond? Is that correct?
Yeah, so there was roughly 120.
Okay.
The commission forfeited 10,000 as part of the Buffalo Meadows proceeding. And then the remaining 110 plus accrued interest would be forfeited as part of this.
Well, most of them are 10,000 and 25,000. And why was Deaver's 100? Is that because the breadth of the customers he served was enormous, or a potential for a problem? I mean, I don't understand, and we don't need to get into it today, but somebody needs to tell me why the bonds are so varied, and why, he's got one for 110, and in this case, 110 or 120 less 10, 110 would not cover what all is going to be encountered. And it seems to me that if we had a larger bond in a scenario like this, then, you could recover those dollars to give to Carolina Water for some of the expenditures and not hit the consumers in the rate base. So, and use bond money to offset some of the requirements. Am I out of line by thinking that way, or you share with me that thought?
So you're correct that, the bond funds that exist here are not going to cover all the investments going to be necessary to get these systems into compliance. The way that that bond kind of came to existence is through a number of transactions where Mr. Deaver acquired these systems. Sometimes acquiring commission regulated utilities, sometimes acquiring basically developer-owned systems. And so that's where you get this sort of odd hodgepodge of bonds, and that's why there's 3 separate bonds that exist. I think this is a warning, another example where the importance of setting an appropriate bond in future proceedings and reevaluating some of the existing bonds for companies. Do they provide the adequate protection? Now, the retired Mr. Hinton would also remind you, bonds have a cost. So providing a proper balance. But I think the legislature was appropriate in taking action to raise the minimum bond. And I think as part of future rulemaking, we would want to just clarify what that applies to, and really think about this for setting future bonds.
Okay, thank you, sir. And, I just want to share, I've only had 2 experiences with Redbird, and I share Commissioner Hughes and Commissioner McKissick and the chair's position on scrutinizing these folks. I have seen and read where they've ignored requests by public staff numerous times, have not worked in good faith, much like Carolina Water and Aqua do. And so, we need to hone in on these folks and see. I understand they operate better for themselves in other states that don't require, you know, they try to minimize avoided costs there, and that's their MO, and they don't have that in North Carolina, so it's not a good fit. But the owner I was dealing with at Atlantic Beach has been waiting a long time for Redbird to pull the deal together, and like Commissioner McKissick, I don't have much faith based on what I've seen so far that it's going to happen. But I do want to thank Don and Carolina Water Service again. Boy, we would be in trouble over Christmas, worse than a blackout, or excuse me, what is a load shedding event. That if the Carolina Water Service didn't step in. So again, to you and your employees, we are, or at least this commissioner is grateful. Thank you.
So I would just say it's our understanding that Redbird has staff that are watching staff conference to monitor this situation. So I hope they hear you loud and clear. And this leads to progress.
Right. And then as a follow-up, Chuck, I realized that you didn't check twice at $4.76 and $4.79. I do have cell phone numbers north of Raleigh. And so whatever you plan to receive on the 25th may be delayed, sir, for that to say.
This won't be the only reason that I get coal in my stocking.
All right, Mr. Junis, just two more very quick questions for you. Just if you could, we want to get some clarification on the record here. Look at the it's page 4 of 6 of Appendix A, where you identify the commercial rates for High Vista and the condos under the residential flat. How did you all arrive at those numbers?
Yes, so using the existing rates, we basically back calculated.
What existing rates? Do you mean Carolina Water WISP 2 or what rates?
So utilizing the existing rates for A and D, for example, the High Vista rates on page 10, where we list the current existing rates, we back calculated based on the sort of their uniform flat rate. So for example, if you take the condos rate of $23 and divide that by the 3533, which is the falls and the commercial rate per REU, you get a ratio of about 0.651, which then we used as a multiplier on Carolina Water's flat rate. So all we're trying to do is back calculate those REUs to then establish those specific rates for those customers in the same ratio that they were under the existing structure.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. And then finally, ordering paragraph 11 is the final ordering paragraph in the order, and it's the reporting obligations for the public staff. Any reason why the commission shouldn't specify that the provisional rates, well, let me ask the question this way. Should the provisional rates continue after 1 year? Or should they be modified to reflect whatever the commission staff's, summary or investigation is at the end of that first year?
I think it's worth evaluating at 1 year. So we'll see what investment's been made. We'll evaluate whether the current rates are covering their costs and whether any shift needs to happen.
Okay, so I'm sorry, and I interrupted you, but my understanding is then the public staff will make a recommendation as to rates in the report that it files at 1 year.
Correct. So it's my understanding that report would cover a description of the improvements that are made, whether that exceeds the bond funds that are dispersed to Carolina Water, a review of customer correspondences, a summary of the financial reports, the quarterly reports that Carolina Water will file, and then a recommendation whether that provisional rate should continue or there should be a modification.
All right, thank you, Mr. Junis. All right, with that, there are no other questions. It's been moved and seconded that this item be approved as recommended by the public staff, subject to minor non-substantive revisions by commission staff in the order. Questions, any additional questions or discussion? If there are none, all in favor indicate with an eye. Is there anyone opposed? All right, that motion carries. Thank you both. Thank you, Mr. Denton, for sitting in the seat.
Absolutely. No problem.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. The commission has its minutes from the December 16th staff conference. I'll take a motion, please.
approval of the minutes.
All right, it's been moved and seconded that the minutes be approved. There's no, any discussion there? No discussion, all in favor indicate with an eye. Is there anyone opposed? Okay, that motion carries. Any additional business for the commission this morning before we adjourn? All right, hearing none, we'll be adjourned. Thank you very much. We're off the record.